Tell me, have you ever desired something so deeply, yet it felt just beyond your grasp? You dream of wealth, love, success, but why does it take so long to appear? What if I told you that time is an illusion, and the only delay is your own consciousness? Stay with me, for today I will unveil how to bring the grandest desires into your life at a speed you never imagined. I once found myself standing in the midst of a world that refused to reflect my desires. I wanted more greater things, things the world told me would take years, effort, and struggle. But I knew something deeper, something few understand. Imagination creates reality. I had tested this truth, and each time it proved itself. There was a time when I desired an opportunity that seemed impossible. The doors were shut, the path unclear, but I did not beg, nor did I chase. I did not look to the outside world for confirmation. Instead, I turned inward, for I knew the secret. Assumption hardens into fact. I sat quietly in the stillness of the night and assumed the feeling of already having it, not as a wish nor a distant hope, but as something already mine. I walked in that state, I breathed in that state until I could no longer distinguish between the imagined and the real, for consciousness is the only reality. And then, as though the world conspired in my favor, circumstances shifted. The very people who once ignored me called upon me. The opportunities I once sought came seeking me, not by force, not by effort, but because I had already claimed them within. You see, the world does not give you what you want, it gives you who you are being. If you wish to manifest the so-called big things faster, you must abandon the idea that they are big. Live in the end. If you see them as distant, they will remain distant. But if you claim them as yours, they must become yours. Every moment you are feeding your mind. Are you indulging in doubt, in waiting, in hoping? Or are you maintaining a strict mental diet where only the thoughts of fulfillment reside? The world is a mirror. It only reflects back what you persistently assume. Doubt is the only enemy. Time is only the shadow of your inner convictions. The law of assumption is absolute. Persist in the assumption and it will become your reality. Do not say, when will it happen? Instead say, it is happening now. Let the feeling consume you. Walk as though you already possess it, and the world will have no choice but to confirm your assumption. Faith is not hoping, it is knowing. The man who assumes the feeling of already having what he seeks will see it manifest. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Faithful persistence is the bridge between the unseen and the seen. So I ask you, who are you being right now? Are you the man waiting for his desires, or the man who already has them? Assume it, feel it, live it, and watch how reality bends to your will. There is no power greater than the imagination, for imagination is the very fabric of creation. Everything you see in this world was once unseen, an invisible thought, a formless idea held within the mind of man. But because it was imagined with conviction, because it was sustained with feeling, it took form and became the reality in which we now live. You need only look around you to see the truth of this law. The chair upon which you sit, the house in which you dwell, the city that surrounds you, each was first an image in the mind of another before it solidified into physical existence. Yet man, in his ignorance, looks outward and believes the world is something separate from himself, something independent of his own creative power. He does not realize that his imagination is the very force shaping his experiences, that every event, every encounter, every circumstance in his life is merely the shadow of his inner world. The great secret is this: if you would change your world, you must first change your imagination. There was a time when I too struggled with this truth. I looked upon my life and saw limitations, difficulties, and obstacles. I believed they were real, solid, immovable. But I was blind to the cause behind them. I did not yet know that they were but the reflections of my inner assumptions, the offspring of my unguarded imagination. The moment I awakened to this truth, everything changed. I recall a time when I desired something that seemed beyond my reach. The world told me it was impossible, that I lacked the means, the connections, the resources to obtain it. And for a moment I believed the world. I allowed my senses to dictate my reality, and so I remained where I was, trapped in the illusion of limitation. But then I remembered. Imagination creates reality. The outer world is nothing more than the projection of the inner world. If I could but change my inner state, the outer world would have no choice but to conform. So I closed my eyes and withdrew from the senses. I turned away from the facts that screamed impossibility, and I stepped into a world more real than anything my physical eyes could perceive. I imagined myself already possessing that which I desired. I did not wish for it. I did not long for it. I assumed it was mine. I walked in that assumption. I felt its reality. I touched it in my mind, and I lived from it as though it were already fact. At first, doubt whispered in my ear. The old patterns of thought attempted to pull me back into the world of appearances, but I persisted. I knew that if I remained faithful to the unseen reality, it would, in time, solidify into the seen. And then, as if by some unseen hand, the outer world began to shift. Circumstances rearranged themselves in ways I could never have planned. Opportunities appeared, doors opened, people moved in harmony with my assumption, all to bring forth that which I had already claimed in imagination. And just as I had felt it real within, it became real without. This is the law. This is the secret that has been hidden in plain sight for those who have eyes to see. Imagination is not a mere fantasy, not idle daydreaming. It is the creative power of the universe, the very substance from which all things are made. Yet so many misuse this power. They imagine failure, they imagine struggle, they imagine lack, and then they wonder why their world reflects back to them these very conditions. They do not realize that they are creating unconsciously, that every thought and feeling they sustain in imagination is a seed planted in the fertile soil of reality. And just as a seed once planted must bear fruit, so too must the assumptions of man manifest in his world. If you would transform your life, you must begin by transforming your imagination. You must dare to assume the best for yourself, to see yourself as already in possession of all that you desire. Do not wait for the world to confirm your assumption. Assume it boldly, and the world will follow. Speak not of what is, but of what must be. Let every thought, every word, every feeling be aligned with the state you wish to occupy. And when doubt creeps in, when the senses tempt you to believe otherwise, remind yourself, imagination creates reality. I tell you now, there is no limit to what you may create. Wealth, health, love, success, each is but a state of consciousness, waiting to be claimed by you. The only question is, what are you imagining? Look within, for within you lies the cause of all things. The moment you take control of your imagination, you take control of your life. Dare to believe in the reality of your assumption, for what you imagine with feeling will harden into fact. Everything that you now see in your world was once an assumption. The house you live in, the job you hold, the relationships you experience, all were once states assumed within the mind before they congealed into reality. There is no other way that anything comes into being. Man believes that external forces shape his destiny, that circumstances dictate his life. But this is a great illusion. It is not the world that determines your fate, it is your assumptions. What you dare to assume as true, whether consciously or unconsciously, will solidify into fact. There was a time when I too struggled with this truth. I had heard that assumption shapes reality, that the unseen world of belief would in time materialize as the visible world. But I had yet to fully grasp its significance. And so life reflected back to me my wavering convictions. I would assume something to be true for a moment, then let doubt creep in, questioning whether my assumption had any real effect. The result was inconsistency. My world fluctuated according to the contradictions within me. But then I tested the law. I decided to assume something bold, something that seemed impossible given my present circumstances. I did not wish for it, nor did I hope. I assumed it was already mine. I closed my eyes and entered the state of the wish fulfilled. I saw through my mind's eye the scene that would take place if my desire were already realized. I felt it with all the intensity of reality, allowing my emotions to confirm that what I imagined was true. When I opened my eyes, nothing had changed in the external world, but I knew better than to be deceived by appearances. The moment I assumed it, the seed was planted, and like all seeds, it required time to take root, to grow, to bloom into the physical world. But the principle was clear. If I persisted in my assumption, if I refused to entertain any thought contrary to it, it must harden into fact. The outer world is nothing more than a mirror, reflecting back the assumptions held within. It does not argue, nor does it resist. It simply yields to the dominant ideas impressed upon it. If you assume lack, if you assume failure, if you assume delay, then these will manifest as your reality. Not because the world is against you, but because it can only give back what you first give to it in imagination. Most men fail to manifest their desires because they do not persist in assumption. They allow their senses to dictate what they believe is real. If they assume wealth but check their bank account and see little, they abandon the assumption and accept lack instead. If they assume success but receive a rejection, they surrender to the idea of failure. But the steadfast man, the man who truly understands this law, does not waver. He knows that assumption precedes reality, that the unseen world of belief will in time take form. He holds firm to his assumption, even when the senses contradict it, because he knows that the world must yield to his inner conviction. I once met a man who had spent years struggling in business. He tried every external method, marketing, networking, hard labor, yet nothing seemed to change his circumstances. When I spoke with him, I asked him to describe how he saw himself in relation to success. Without realizing it, he revealed his core assumption. He believed himself to be a man who always struggled, a man for whom success was difficult and fleeting. And so, despite all his efforts, life continued to reflect that belief. I told him that no amount of action could override a false assumption. He had to first see himself as already successful before the world could reflect that success. He had to assume not that he was becoming successful, but that he already was. He followed my instruction. Each night before sleep, he entered into the state of the wish fulfilled. He saw himself as a prosperous businessman, heard the congratulations of friends, felt the security of abundance. He did this until it felt natural, until it felt real. Within months, everything changed. New opportunities arose, unexpected connections were made, and his business flourished. Not because he worked harder, but because he changed his assumption. The world simply reshaped itself to reflect his new state of consciousness. Assumption hardens into fact. This is the great truth that governs all creation. The moment you claim something as true within, you set into motion the forces that will make it true without. But you must not waver. You must persist in the assumption, even when all evidence denies it. You must hold firm in the conviction that what you have assumed is already a fact, and reality will have no choice but to conform. You need not know how it will come to pass. The ways and means are not your concern. The only thing required of you is to assume the state and live from it. The world will take care of the rest. The people, the circumstances, the opportunities, all will appear in perfect harmony to fulfill that which you have already accepted as true. If you wish to transform your life, do not look outward, look inward. Do not struggle to change the world, change your assumption, and the world will follow. Whatever you dare to assume with faith, whatever you persist in as real, must become your experience. Assumption hardens into fact. This is the law, and it cannot fail. There is a secret that, when understood, will transform every aspect of your life. It is the key to manifestation, the bridge between the unseen and the seen, the difference between waiting for a desire and receiving it. It is this: feeling is the secret. The world does not respond to your wishes, your prayers, or even your words. It responds to the feeling that you hold within. If you would change your life, you must first change your feeling, for it is the feeling that creates. Man walks through life believing that his emotions are reactions to the world around him, that he feels joy when he receives good news, sorrow when he faces disappointment, and hope when things seem possible. But this is an inversion of the truth. The outer world is not the cause of your feelings. Your feelings are the cause of the outer world. The state you occupy within yourself, the emotions you consistently dwell in, are shaping and molding the events of your life. There was a time when I did not know this, a time when I believed the world dictated how I should feel. I thought that if I wished for something strongly enough, if I longed for it with all my heart, it would come to pass. But desire alone is not enough. Wishing only confirms that you do not have. The man who wishes for wealth confirms his poverty. The woman who longs for love confirms her loneliness. To want is to acknowledge the absence of a thing, and as long as you acknowledge its absence, it cannot appear in your world. I remember an experience that revealed this truth to me. I desired something greatly, but it remained out of reach. I tried everything. I visualized, I affirmed, I held on to the thought of it day and night, but nothing changed. Then I asked myself a simple question: if I already had it, how would I feel? That question was the key. In that moment, I realized my error. I had been focusing on wanting, but I had not assumed having. So I closed my eyes and stepped into the state of possession. I did not think of my desire as something far away. I felt as though it was already mine. I walked in my imagination as the person who already had what I sought. I felt the relief, the gratitude, the joy of fulfillment. I allowed the feeling to consume me, to become real within me, and as I persisted in this state, the outer world had no choice but to reshape itself to match my assumption. This is the law of creation. What you feel to be true will become true. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is the only reality. The moment you embody the feeling of already having what you seek, you have set the wheels of manifestation in motion. The world is simply a mirror, reflecting back the state in which you dwell. If you wish to change what is reflected, do not fight the mirror. Change the feeling within yourself, and the mirror will adjust accordingly. Many believe that they must first see proof before they can feel a thing to be true. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the law. Feeling comes first, evidence follows. The man who waits for external confirmation will wait forever, for he has not yet moved inwardly. But the man who dares to feel himself already in possession of his desire will see it harden into fact. Think for a moment of something you desire. It does not matter what it is. Wealth, love, health, success. Now ask yourself, if you had it now, how would you feel? That feeling is the key. It is not enough to imagine the thing itself. You must experience the feeling it will bring. You must dwell in that state so completely that it becomes natural to you. Once it does, the world will reshape itself in ways you could never predict. Doubt will tempt you. Your senses will insist that nothing has changed. But do not be deceived by appearances. If you persist in the feeling of already having, the world must conform. The law does not fail. It cannot fail. Feeling is the secret, not effort, not struggle, not time. Feeling. This is why many who work hard never succeed, while others, seemingly without effort, attract abundance. It is not about labor, it is about state. The man who labors with a feeling of struggle will manifest more struggle. The man who assumes the feeling of effortless success will find success flowing to him effortlessly. The same is true in all things. The woman who assumes the feeling of already being loved will find love appearing in her life. The one who feels healthy will see health reflected in his body. The law is simple. Feel yourself into the state of the wish fulfilled, and you will manifest it. Do not wait for the world to give you permission to feel the way you want to feel. Do not wait for money to appear before you feel wealthy, or for love to come before you feel cherished. Decide now that you already are the person who has what you desire. Step into that state, live from it, breathe from it, and the world will have no choice but to rearrange itself in perfect harmony with your assumption. What you feel in imagination will solidify into reality. This is the way the world has always worked. It is the way creation unfolds. There is no power outside of you shaping your destiny. It is your feeling that creates your world. The greatest secret to manifestation is simple, yet few dare to practice it. It is not about hoping, wishing, or waiting for a thing to come to pass. It is about living as though it already is. To bring forth anything into this world, you must assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and dwell in that state so completely that it becomes real to you, more real than the world of the senses. You must live in the end. Man believes he must struggle, that he must work endlessly to force reality into shape. But reality is not something to be conquered. It is something to be assumed. The outer world is but the shadow of the inner world, and shadows do not move on their own. They shift only when the source of light moves. The moment you adjust your inner state, your assumptions, your feelings, your dwelling place in consciousness, the outer world has no choice but to conform. There was a time when I too believed I had to wait for my desires to materialize before I could feel the joy of their fulfillment. I thought that I must first see results, that life must first confirm my desires before I could believe in their reality. But I was wrong. I learned that waiting is denial. To wait is to confess that you do not yet have. And as long as you persist in that state, the world will confirm your waiting by keeping your desire from you. I remember vividly an experience that transformed my understanding of this law. A dear friend of mine had long desired to move to a new city, but circumstances held him back. He had no job there, no connections, no apparent way to make the transition. He believed that once the opportunity arose, once the way was made clear, then he could prepare for the move. But I told him he was approaching it backward. I asked him, if you were already living there, if the move had already happened, how would you feel? At first he struggled to grasp the idea. His senses screamed that he was still in the same place, that nothing had changed. But I told him, the world does not shape your feelings. Your feelings shape the world. If he would dare to live in the end, if he would assume the feeling of already residing in that city, of already working in the place he desired, then the outer world would move to reflect that assumption. So he practiced. Each night before sleep, he would close his eyes and transport himself in imagination. He walked through the streets of his new city, smelled the air, heard the sounds, and felt the pavement beneath his feet. He imagined himself unlocking the door to his new home, sitting at his desk in his new job, engaging with friends he had not yet met. He immersed himself so fully in the experience that, though his body remained where it was, in consciousness he had already moved. At first, the world seemed unchanged, but within weeks, opportunities began to appear. A position opened in his field, a position he had not even known existed. A friend unexpectedly introduced him to someone who had connections in that very city. The pieces aligned effortlessly, and before long he found himself exactly where he had imagined. Not because he forced it, not because he chased it, but because he had already lived there in consciousness long before he arrived physically. This is the law. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, when you live in the end, The outer world bends to reflect that state. It cannot do otherwise, for it is only an echo of your inner world. The mistake most people make is that they remain fixated on the process, on how things should unfold. They worry about the steps, about whether circumstances will allow for their desire to manifest. But all of this is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the state you occupy. If you are already there in imagination, the bridge of incidents will unfold to carry you there in reality. There is no desire too great, no circumstance too impossible. The world you see around you is not solid or fixed. It is fluid, responsive, obedient to your inner assumptions. The moment you dare to claim something as already done, the wheels are set in motion. The means will appear, the necessary people will be drawn into your life, and the path will clear itself. Not because you forced it, but because you aligned yourself with the end result. There is no power outside of you determining whether or not your desires come to pass. The only determining factor is your willingness to assume the feeling of already having that which you seek. The man who waits for proof will wait forever. But the man who lives as though it were already so will find reality conforming to his assumption. Ask yourself now, if your desire were already fulfilled, how would you feel? If you had already achieved your goal, what would your inner state be? Dare to step into that feeling now. Do not wait for permission. Do not wait for the world to give you signs. Assume it, live from it, and watch as the world reshapes itself to match your assumption. You are not here to struggle. You are not here to chase after your dreams like a beggar seeking scraps. You are here to create, and creation is not a matter of force, it is a matter of assumption. The only question is, are you willing to live in the end? The world you see around you is nothing more than a reflection of your past assumptions, your previous states of consciousness, materialized into form. It is not solid, not fixed, not independent of your mind. It is a shadow that lags behind, an echo of what you have already believed to be true. And yet, most men make the fatal mistake of allowing the world of the senses to dictate what they believe, trapping themselves in a cycle of repetition, recreating the same experiences over and over again. To manifest anything, you must learn the great art of ignoring the senses. You must train yourself to disregard appearances, to close your eyes to the evidence of the world, and instead believe in what you have assumed to be true. The outer world is not the cause, it is the effect. If you react to it, if you let it dictate your inner state, you have surrendered your creative power and become a slave to what already exists. But if you refuse to be moved by what your senses report, if you persist in the assumption of your wish fulfilled, despite all contradictory evidence, you will watch reality reshape itself before your eyes. I remember a time when my circumstances seemed impossible, when the world insisted that my desire was beyond reach. Every logical argument, every visible fact, every voice around me declared that what I wanted could not be. And for a time I believed them. I allowed doubt to creep in, and as I wavered, the world continued to reflect my uncertainty. Nothing changed. My senses confirmed the lack. And as long as I accepted that as truth, my situation remained unchanged. Then I remembered the law. I knew that if I wanted to see a different world, I had to first assume it to be different. I had to ignore what my eyes showed me, what my ears heard, what my hands could touch. I had to close my eyes to the world and open them only to my imagination, seeing not what was, but what I desired to be. I entered into the state of my wish fulfilled, lived in it, felt it, and refused to let anything outside of me shake that conviction. Days passed and nothing changed. My senses still reported the same unwanted reality, but I did not waver. I knew that the world must conform, that what I assumed would solidify into fact. And then, without warning, everything shifted. The very circumstances that seemed so fixed, so impossible to change, melted away as if they had never been real to begin with. What once stood as an unmovable obstacle was suddenly gone, replaced by the exact thing I had assumed to be true. This is the law. The world must yield to the man who refuses to accept anything less than his assumption. But it requires faith, not in something outside of you, but in your own imagination. The mistake most make is that they assume something for a moment, but when their senses contradict it, they abandon the assumption. They allow doubt to creep in, believing what their eyes show them rather than what they have decreed in consciousness. And so the world remains unchanged, simply reflecting their divided mind. You must stand firm. You must persist in your assumption, even when everything outside of you denies it. The man who assumes wealth but sees an empty bank account must not let that sight disturb him. The woman who assumes love but is surrounded by loneliness must not accept that as final. These are only shadows of past thoughts. The moment you turn your back on them and refuse to acknowledge them as real, they begin to dissolve, making way for the new assumption to take their place. There is no greater test than this: to believe in the unseen, to hold firm to an assumption that has no visible proof. But this is the path of creation. Reality does not precede belief, belief precedes reality. And the only thing that stands between you and your desire is your willingness to ignore everything that contradicts it. There was once a man who longed for a position that seemed entirely out of reach. He was underqualified, had no connections, and was told time and time again that it was impossible. But he refused to accept that as truth. Each night he shut his eyes and imagined himself already in that position. He felt the desk beneath his hands, heard the congratulations of his colleagues, lived and breathed in the end result. He did not concern himself with how it would happen, nor did he allow himself to dwell on appearances. He ignored every rejection, every piece of evidence that said no. To him, it was already done, and then, in a way no one could have predicted, the position was offered to him. Not through logic, not through struggle, but through the effortless unfolding of his assumption. The one who had been chosen for the role suddenly withdrew, an opening was created, and he was invited in. To those who do not understand the law, it seemed like luck, but he knew better. He knew that the moment he assumed it and ignored all evidence to the contrary, it was only a matter of time before the world caught up to his assumption. This is the way it works for all things. If you can train yourself to ignore the senses, to walk by faith in your assumption rather than by sight, there is nothing you cannot bring forth. The world is not rigid, not fixed. It is a fluid, malleable thing shaped entirely by the convictions you hold within. If you desire to see change, do not look outward, look inward. Do not fight against circumstances. Assume the reality you wish to see and remain faithful to it. Dare to ignore what your senses report, and reality will bend to match your conviction. Nothing in this world can stand against the one who persists in his assumption. The reason most men fail to manifest their desires is not that the law does not work. It is that they do not persist long enough for the unseen to harden into reality. They waver, they doubt, they react to the outer world instead of remaining firm in their inner conviction. They assume a thing, but when their senses deny it, they retreat back into their old beliefs. And so the world remains unchanged. But the one who persists, the one who assumes the feeling of his wish fulfilled and does not move from that state, no matter what the senses say, he will see his assumption solidify into fact. This is the great secret of manifestation. The outer world must conform to the state you persistently occupy. I once desired something that seemed beyond reach. The world told me it was impossible. Logic, circumstance, and even those closest to me assured me that what I wanted could not be. And for a time, I allowed these voices to shake me. I questioned, I doubted, and because I wavered in my assumption, nothing changed. My desire remained a distant dream, something always just beyond my grasp. But then I remembered the law. I remembered that what I see around me is only a reflection of my past states of mind. And if I wanted a new reality, I had to persist in a new assumption. I had to hold on to my desire with such intensity, such unwavering faith, that the world would have no choice but to reshape itself in response. So I closed my eyes and assumed. I stepped into the state of my wish fulfilled, feeling it as though it were already mine. And when I opened my eyes, though nothing in the world had changed, I refused to let the outer world shake my inner conviction. I lived in the end, spoke from the end, thought from the end. Each time doubt arose, I rejected it. Each time circumstances contradicted my assumption, I ignored them. Days passed, then weeks. The world did not immediately shift, but I did not waver. I knew the law was working, and then, just as naturally as the sun rises, the impossible happened. The very things that had once seemed unchangeable rearranged themselves. The doors that had been closed swung open effortlessly. What had once been a dream became reality, not through force, not through struggle, but through persistence in assumption. This is where most fail. They give up too soon. They assume for a moment, for a day, perhaps even for a week. But then they allow the world of the senses to convince them that nothing is happening. They become discouraged. They fall back into doubt. And by doing so, they undo the very thing they had set in motion. The law does not fail. Men fail to persist. You must train yourself to remain faithful to your assumption, to hold on to it as though your life depends on it. If you desire health, do not allow the symptoms in your body to shake you. If you desire wealth, do not let an empty bank account disturb you. These are only shadows of past assumptions. Persist in the new assumption, and the world must conform. Think of the sculptor. He begins with a rough block of stone. At first, it does not resemble the vision he holds in his mind, but he does not abandon his work simply because it does not immediately take shape. He continues to carve, to refine, to persist in his vision until the form he desires emerges. Manifestation is no different. The first time you assume a new state, the world may not immediately reflect it. But as you persist, as you continue to occupy that state without wavering, the unseen will move and the visible will take form. Many say, "But I have assumed, and yet nothing has changed." To them I say, have you persisted? Have you remained unmoved, unshaken, utterly convinced despite all contrary evidence? Or have you wavered, doubted, allowed yourself to be persuaded by the senses? The world is only a mirror. It does not lie. If it has not yet reflected your desire, it is because you have not yet fully occupied that state. I once knew a woman who longed for a specific home. She had no means to afford it, and every practical consideration told her it was impossible. But she understood the law. Each night, before she slept, she imagined herself already living in that house. She walked through its rooms in imagination, felt the texture of the walls, smelled the air, heard the sound of her footsteps in the halls. She did not know how it would happen, nor did she concern herself with the details. She simply persisted. Months passed and nothing changed. But she did not waver. She refused to accept anything but the fulfillment of her desire. And then, as if by magic, a series of unexpected events unfolded. The house, which had been completely out of reach, became available under circumstances she never could have predicted. She moved in, and only then did she realize. Her persistence had made it inevitable. This is the law in action. Reality bends to the one who refuses to accept anything less than his assumption. There is no desire too great, no circumstance too difficult, that it cannot be overcome by persistence in assumption. Dare to persist. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and refuse to be moved. No matter how much time passes, no matter what the senses report, remain firm. The world must, in time, bend to your unshaken assumption. There is nothing in this world that stands outside of you. The reality you experience is nothing more than the outpicturing of your assumptions, a reflection of the states you have occupied in consciousness. If you desire change, you must first change within. If you long for something greater, you must assume it is already yours. The key to manifestation has always been simple. What you persistently assume, you inevitably become. To manifest the great things in life, you must first embrace the truth that your imagination is the only reality. You must learn to feel the wish fulfilled, To step into the state of already having that which you desire, you must abandon the habit of doubt, of questioning how and when, and instead live in the certainty that what you assume is as real as the breath you take. You must learn to ignore the senses, to turn your back on appearances, and to trust in the unseen. The world may tell you no, circumstances may appear fixed, but these are only reflections of old beliefs. They have no power except the power you give them. Persist in your assumption, refuse to be shaken, and reality must conform. And above all, you must persist. Many begin with enthusiasm but falter when they do not see immediate results. They assume for a moment, then allow doubt to creep in. But the one who holds fast to his assumption, who remains unwavering in the face of opposition, will inevitably witness the fulfillment of his desire. The world is not rigid. It is clay in the hands of the one who dares to persist in faith. So take this knowledge and apply it. No longer see yourself as a victim of circumstances, but as the master of your reality. There is no dream too great, no goal too distant, that it cannot be reached by the power of assumption, faith, and persistence. What you assume today will harden into fact tomorrow. So assume wisely, persist courageously, and watch as the unseen becomes seen, the impossible becomes inevitable, and your desires take form before your very eyes.